The state of the Zambian economy is probably the worst it has been in decades, and in certain aspects, the worst in the history of the country. Therefore, stimulating the economy is one of the biggest priorities of the New Heritage Party. There are 5 critical issues facing the Zambian economy that must be addressed within 6 months of getting into government. These issues include the following. Number 1, a declining collection of domestic revenues. This has resulted in an increase in the tax burden borne by a few individuals and companies and an increase in levies on the Zambian people. A crippling debt burden. This has created uncertainty for the future and sovereignty of the country. This has led to a significant portion of the country budget being allocated to debt repayments. Number 3, a depreciating currency. This has essentially doubled the cost of food, fuel, power, and essential commodities. Additionally, the cost of doing business has become extremely prohibitive. Number 4, a lack of liquidity in the market. This has resulted in a credit crunch with growing liabilities and payment arrears in both the private and public sectors, as well as a growing non-performing loans in the financial services sector. And lastly, reduced credit and lending to the private sector. This has further constrained the ability of local businesses to stay afloat. All these issues have combined to create a downward spiral that, if not arrested, will sink the economy further and further. The interventions of the New Heritage Party to resolve each of these issues are as follows. Enhancing domestic revenue collection. Zambia's revenue collection as a percentage of GDP currently stands at around 18%. Compared to other countries in the region, which average 25%, Zambia's is very low. The following measures will be sought to increase revenue collection. Number 1, we will widen the tax base and capture more taxpayers, thus reducing the burden on the few taxpayers in the formal sector. Number 2, we will seek to lower tax rates. History has proven that a lower tax rate has the effect of increasing tax revenues for the government while reducing the burden on the companies and individuals that pay those taxes. Number 3, we will seek to reclassify minerals and natural resources as assets and all extractions classified as asset sales, as opposed to taxable resources. In essence, all companies involved in the extraction of natural resource would purchase a resource at a price to be fairly and equitably determined, thereby removing the complicated tax issues in the mining sector. This would have a significant impact on cash flows and predictability for revenue collection purposes, and would provide a consistent and stable policy for investors in the extractive industries. Number 4, we will plug the revenue leakages in key sectors like mining, where significant value and minerals go undeclared. Additionally, the framework for mining is porous and needs to be well regulated to ensure revenues are adequately captured. Managing the debt burden. The growing debt burden has had the most impact on the downward spiral of the Zambian economy. Firstly, it has increased pressure on the exchange rate as more forex is required to service huge debts which are denominated in hard currency. Secondly, it has resulted in a liquidity crisis due to the fact that government spending has shifted from local sector spending and payments of domestic arrears onto foreign debt service. As such, managing the unsustainable debt is a priority in order to reverse the damaging effects on the economy. The New Heritage Party will deal with the debt issue as follows. Number 1, we will first and foremost establish the actual debt levels and profile. By this we mean the cost, the maturity, the purpose, the arrears, and the volatility of each of the debts that have been acquired. Number 2, based on that debt profile, we will propose a restructure and refinancing plan. This will involve the following. A, undertake a debt prioritization with the most expensive and volatile being managed first. B, we will create a proposal to restructure the terms of the debt with a clear plan of how those debts will be honored. C, we will seek to replace some toxic debt with cheaper and friendlier options. 3, create a repayment plan that works towards reducing the debt service ratio to below 25% of our national budget. This will be achieved by creating a national debt service fund that will be ring-fenced and isolated from the national budget and central treasury, thereby reducing the impact of the debt on the economy and liquidity. Below is how the National Debt Service Fund will work and be funded. As you can see, the National Debt Service Fund will be set up as a USD denominated fund and will be managed independently. There will be three main sources of funding for the National Debt Service Fund. Number one, from the national budget. Our aim is for a fixed allocation of not more than 25% of the national budget. We are aware that the current allocation is about 50%, but we shall work towards the 25% target. This will be achieved by increasing government revenues as outlined in the previous section on enhancing domestic revenue collection. This measure of fixing the allocation to debt service will make funding available for spending in the domestic economy to improve liquidity and meet the fiscal spending requirements. It will also force solutions from other sources. Secondly, from refinancing. We will refinance and seek debt which is better priced and has better terms to manage the toxic debt. Number three, from projects and assets. The idea here is that the government borrow to embark on a number of projects, even if overpriced and uncommercial. We will seek to commercialize some of these projects and assets and pledge the receivables and capital releases from these assets towards the debt service fund. Improve and stabilize the exchange rate. To improve and stabilize the exchange rate, the focus should be multi-pronged, targeting the demand and supply for both local currency and foreign currency. However, due to lack of cooperation on the fiscal side, the Bank of Zambia has been forced to manage the exchange rate mostly by focusing on reducing supply of local currency in the hope of increasing its demand. As the New Heritage Party, our strategy to improve and stabilize the exchange rate will be focused on the areas highlighted in green. Number one, increasing the supply of foreign currency. This means increasing exports to be in excess of our import bill. There will be need to drive non-traditional exports as well as traditional exports. Number two, reduce the demand for foreign currency. This will mean reducing our import bill by driving import substitution in agro inputs and various other imports so as to promote local manufacturing and production. And number three, will increase the demand for local currency. The biggest demand for local currency are companies and individuals. Therefore, there will be need to reduce interest rates to stimulate domestic borrowing and thereby drive local spending and consumption. The biggest impact on the improved and stabilized exchange rate will be a reduction in the cost of living, as cost of goods and services, which are mostly driven by the exchange rate, will reduce. Additionally, the above measures will ensure an increase in liquidity and lending to the real economy in order to drive productivity and growth. Driving productivity and growth. The New Heritage Party will seek to drive productivity and growth using the following interventions. Number one, we will lift the bans on exports of maize and remove interference on policy that affect the ability of farmers to grow and get a good price on their maize and other agricultural produce. Number two, we will regulate, organize, and make efficient the mining and agricultural sectors in order to generate significant export revenues to inject into and stimulate the economy. Number three, we will revise taxes on importation of equipment in certain sectors for a period in order to incentivize investment and local production. Number four, we will reduce the cost of doing business, thereby enabling our products and businesses to become more competitive both locally and internationally. And number five, we will focus on value addition and manufacturing so that more revenues and jobs can be created. Lastly, we will give incentives for local investors and entrepreneurs. We speak about this in more detail in the section on citizen empowerment. With that, I will hand over to our Secretary General, Daisy Kopolo, to go through our long-term economic development model, which we are calling the economic solar system.